Known as the place where the community gathers to discuss challenges, create opportunities, and celebrate accomplishments, the Levin College Forum program is a catalyst for thoughtful public debate, innovative thinking, new ideas, and timely action addressing critical issues that impact Northeast Ohio.
Well, good afternoon. I want to thank you all for coming this afternoon. Welcome. So, the college is an institution that is important to all of us. And over the years, it's really become a precious asset in many ways. The college has built a regional, national, and international reputation for our scholarly research, training generations of urban planners, public administrators, nonprofit leaders, and scholars, and I think most importantly, collaborating with neighborhood and civic leaders to address key challenges in Cleveland and in the region. But for all institutions, such as the college, to continue as being relevant, it has to celebrate its history. It also has to explain its underlying values to its internal and external stakeholders on a continual basis. I think we shouldn't do that, though, in a self-referential way, but to own what we've done well and what we need to do differently given changing times. This discussion is part of what we're calling a strategic refresh that we're going through here at the college. Now, this strategic refresh is not for change's sake, but to help us adjust to and manage what it means to be an urban college in a fluid and global context. We're inviting you, our stakeholders, to help us with our refresh discussion. We want your input, and we'll be letting you know how that input can be provided in the coming months. Now, before I close this welcome and turn it over to Associate Dean Bob Gleason, I have a couple things to say. Maybe three things. We have received calls for additional panel discussions in exploring the history of the college. And rest assured, we will use any number of ways, including panel discussions, to highlight and document the many individuals who have built this institution. It is a testament to the high regard for the college that so many feel an overwhelming ownership of the institution. We understand and value that feeling of ownership. The second thing I want to say is we need to thank the Levin Forum series, and especially Molly Schnoke and Kathy Hexter for hosting us. And the last thing I have to do, and it's a function I'm learning as a relatively new dean, is that at all steps, at all matters of ways, I have to raise money. So I have been told, actually ordered, to tell you that there are water things over here that we need to shamelessly plug and sell for $10. So I have done my fundraising duty as dean and will now turn it over to Bob Gleason, who incidentally is leading our strategic refresh process, and he may want to say a few words about that process and how this panel fits into that process. But I want to publicly thank Bob for leading us through this very important process and thank our colleagues on the panel. Again, welcome and thank you for coming out. Bob?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dean England. Welcome to what I think is going to be a very interesting conversation. And our goal is to have this a conversation. We're going to kick it off with some discussions, but we have deliberately planned enough time for a lot of questions from the audience as well and get some discussions going. Before we get started, the process for doing that is Molly, who's over at the table over there, has been handing out question cards. And any questions you have, put them on those cards, and then pass them over and make sure she gets them. And when we get to that point, she'll funnel them up here. And that's just an orderly way of doing that. So please, as ideas occur to you and questions occur to you, jot them down and get them into that process. Let me start by saying a word or two about why we're doing this now and amplify some of the comments that Roland has already said. Every institution needs to constantly be thinking and rethinking once again its purpose. Institutions are made of people, and people shape institutions. They go back and forth. And that conversation over time is partly what we're reflecting on here today, but it also is what will guide us into the future. What are the key questions that we need to be thinking about that connect our past, our present, and our future? And as part of the strategic refresh process, I wanted to start our thinking today by just throwing out a couple of these questions that we've been thinking about, and we want you to be thinking about as well, because we think they are really relevant for stitching together the past, the present, and what future we want to build together in this institution. The first is, what is the role of an urban university, right? And particularly, what's the role of an urban college within a broader urban university? Because that's the context in which we live here. How do we attract the most talented people, students, faculty, staff, research staff, administrative staff? Right? How do we attract the most talented people who are going to be driven to excellence in everything they do because they're part of an institution that has this unusual mixture of educational activities, research generation, and community service and engagement that we have, right? It's that environment that pushes us all to excellence. So how do we attract the best people in all of those categories? How do we finance all of that? We're a public university. We live in an era, everyone here is aware, of a lot of fiscal austerity and a lot of financial constraints. So how do we finance all of those different missions that we feel are fundamental to our ability to achieve world-class excellence in what we do? How do we pick our priorities? And bottom line, how do we measure our own performance against these large goals and the rather audacious belief we have that we can make a difference in urban settings as an urban college, part of an urban university? How do we measure that? So those are kind of the big questions that we have. But all of those questions kind of float out there in the ether, but they affect people as individuals. They affect each of us as individuals as we walk in the door and encounter this institution, as we do our work, as we add to its legacy, as we make choices about where we want to go. And when I was asked, well, how would we organize sort of a reflection on the past, that brought me to the idea, well, we should organize it as a series of discussions from people who have walked into these doors at different times and have helped build this place into what it has become. Because the people and the institutions and the conversation back and forth between those two that really determine what kind of a college we are and where we want to be steering next. So what we did, and this is not easy because there are a lot of individuals who have walked in these doors, and multiple doors, because as Roberta says, this is the 5th place that we've had a door through which someone could walk since we got started, right? But we've had lots and lots of people. Many of you here in this audience are people who have walked through these doors and have really made an important contribution, and you have your story to tell, right? So how do you do that? So we figured, well, why don't we at least organize it by people who have walked through different doors at different times, right? So what we have today is a panel of 4 distinguished guests, each of whom has encountered this place at a different time. and yet hasn't run fleeing, has stayed part of it, and has made important contributions. First, Roberta Steinbacher, who her current title, I won't go through the history of everybody here, is Professor Emerita, who first encountered this place, I believe, in 1969. When we got together, we were talking about it. She was out in the community doing interesting and important work, and people from here ran into her. I think that's her story. Close? Okay, she'll give us the real spiel. Second is Stephen Minter, who we are proud to say serves as executive in residence and senior fellow here today. And I believe he first encountered this place, he said, in 1975. We'll hear more about that and what he found and what's happened since. Third is Norm Krumholtz, Professor Emeritus, who first encountered this place, I think officially in 1979, but had been director of planning for the city for long before that, and in fact came here to put in place one of our hallmark neighborhood development strategies and neighborhood research institutes. And we'll let Norm tell the story from there. And then Dennis Keating, who tells us that one of the reasons he hadn't even been here more than a day in Cleveland ever when he was attracted here from the Bay Area in California in 1983, and was attracted partly because of the work that Norm was doing, as well as Tom Byer, who I believe I see here in the community. There you are, Tom. And we'll let Dennis tell us about the place he found and how he has affected it and how it has affected him since. So without me dithering on further, I would like to ask Roberta, what we've done is we've asked each person to give us 10 minutes or so reflection on their own personal story of how they have interacted with this place over time. There we go. And then we'll take it from there, questions and answers. Roberta?
Thank you, Bob. Welcome everybody to our newest of the 5 buildings that we have, that this place began around and in, and the doors. That's a good expression, going through the door. I just went out the door of the last one, last year. So anyway, I'm still around. So it was, Bob is right, I came to Cleveland in '67 for a joint project that Ford Foundation funded in response to what was then called the urban riots. And our Huff uprising was in '66, and I came in '67, and Glenville was in '68. Also '67 was the founding year, was approved by the Board of Trustees of the Institute of Urban Studies, which some of the great alums that came up to me earlier this afternoon were in that early period. So you correct me if I'm wrong, y'all. Anyway, so the way I came to the first building was the assistant director of the Institute of Urban Studies was hired by the Ford Foundation to evaluate the project. It was still going. I was in it 2 years, and it had another year and a half, I think. So I got to know him. His name was Ralph Brody. At that time, they were searching for a director. They had been through 2 already, from '67 to '69, fall of '69. So it was a hard job. These were good men, but it was a hard job. So I'm coming in when there's an assistant director. He did the evaluation, and while we were doing this the summer of '69, he said, well, why don't you just teach a course for us? This would be, as we call them today, part-timers. I said, what do you want me to teach? He said, well, I don't know. We just have 3 courses in the curriculum. What do you know? I said, I teach abnormal psychology. I said, I also taught statistics. This was when I was a grad student. The ink wasn't dry yet on my diploma. So that's what I had taught as a grad assistant. Anyway, he said, well, make up one that fits the city. You've been out here 2 years running around doing things. So I did. It was called Community and Social Change. Now, so anyway, I want to back up a minute to the first door at '69 when I was being questioned about how the project went. It was called Project Bridge. So it's up there on Prospect, which is now a parking lot, and it was one of the millionaires' mansions on the alley of Euclid, I guess. So there they all were in the basement of that old mansion, There were no windows. There weren't even those high windows, whatever you call them. So it was Ralph Brody and 4 other people. At that time, we had a definitely interdisciplinary, half-time people. Everybody else, their other half was back in some department. Mine, of course, was no department. I was a part-timer teaching one course and getting evaluated from the Ford Foundation. So there was an economist, a biologist. Even then, we were in environmental science, Dr. Kellogg, wonderful. So in business, marketing, and sociologist. So anyway, what struck me first, Bob asked to say what attracted us, was the camaraderie and the discussions and what they were doing in the city. This was, the Burke-Weld study was being conducted, which gave us, in the end, the Ohio income tax. That is not something political to walk into, but it worked, and that's when the income tax was then implemented in 1972. So then along comes Tom Campbell, the chair of later on, the 69, when I'm in and out of there. He is the chair of the search committee looking for what turned out to be him. And then, so when he says, I'm going to hire you, and you start in January 70. I was ready to leave town. I mean, I was finished with that project. So I did that. So I was half-time in psychology, and I was still teaching my community and social change, which I tell you, I didn't know that much about. They don't teach you that in psychology. So again, I want to just say here, the spirit of the activism was great among these four men that I joined, and they were. Tom, right away, those of you who remember Tom Campbell, he always had an idea to be done, filled, made to work, and all of that. So I was writing grants to train the media, heavenly days. Anyway, sensitization to the urban problems and issues and so on. And then we were training police. LEAA was just giving out lots of money at that time, and CETA, we were involved in manpower. So teaching was, it was kind of tipped toward the community in the early days of this institute and this college. So that was quite a baptism by fire for me. And then we had a bachelor's degree, but the degree, of course, was given out through arts and sciences. We had 8 majors. In 71, Tom said, you need to construct a master's of science in urban studies. I said, oh yeah, curriculum. I had never thought about curriculum. So we did that. And again, some of the alums here tonight were part of the first, second, third class back then. And he wanted a master of science so that we could do research on the city and so forth. So then, after a while, we started on, the place began to be questioned by other members of the astute faculty back then. What are they doing over there? And Tom was in the paper way too much for people's, in the state institution it was. It was only like 5 years old itself. So he was getting a little anxious. And Kent State happened around in there, and the students were, anyway, the students that flocked to that master's science degree were activists. They came because they wanted to make a difference in the city. And that really was something the faculty saw and absorbed some of it in our institute, not anywhere else much in the university that I know of. So the question arose, what are we going to do with that bunch over there on Prospect? That would be the 5 of us. So Tom Byer, were you there then yet? I don't think so. But anyway, you came later there. So we moved to Chester Building, and they formed a committee, what to do with the Institute of Urban Studies. Well, there was a committee. We worked a year. We got it to the Senate, and it failed. So we were all very dejected, so then they got rid of the committee, and I ran the next one. I don't know how I ever did that. I don't know if they appointed me or I said I'd do this or else, or I didn't have any pull. I'm kidding. So anyway, I ran that one, and the MPA was supposed to be in there. They backed out. I mean, the original thing, they were going to be in there with us. They backed out, and the students took to the streets. That talk about protests going on in the country in the 60s. This was now the 70s, but these were people of the 60s. And if it hadn't been for students, I say this till the day I'm not able to come down here anymore. We wouldn't be here sitting here today if it weren't for the students in that era, and later on too. I'm not. We have active students all the time. So, 2 minutes. Thank you. So the president made it an interim college with an interim director and an interim something else. And I was the interim chair, interim chair. So in 77 it passed, the students were happy, we were happy. We had no idea what running a college and forming it would end up being, and here we are. But I want to say that it's the activism of the students, it was the issues at the time, racial justice and the war that was still going on, and it got us into that active spirit, that active role in this university and in the city. So then we created some more degrees and so on, and I left in '82 to go to state government for 5 years, and then I happily came back here.
That's great. Thank you very much. I don't know if this has come on back yet. Yes. Thank you very much. I love the descriptions. People always, when people see big institutions, they always assume that it was born that way. And institutions are built and evolve over time. And they indeed are the collections of all of our stories, of how things evolved. What I'd like to do next is have Steve Minter, who saw this institution at first from outside and encountered it in the community. And Steve, I'd love to hear what you first saw.
Well, thank you, Bob. Looking out here in the audience, I think you could probably pull half a dozen different people up here to give their stories. I'm couldn't be more thrilled to be organically connected with the Levin College, and it's hard for me to believe it's been 13 years I've been part of it. So I feel like an insider. History ends up often being a collection of stories. Let me just share with you some vignettes from my experience in association here with the college. And actually it starts before the college was born. I realized it in terms of going back and thinking about it and reading this wonderful little book again. And when you're asked to think about it, then you spot a lot of other things. But my first association with the academic side and the importance of research in the academic institutions really flows out of the Huff and Glenville issues. I started my career as a social worker in the Cuyahoga County Welfare Department and helped open the first office outside of the main office in Huff at 85th and Euclid Avenue, and was there at the time of the Huff riots. And then later, when Carl Stokes was elected mayor, as some of you will recall, one of the things he did was establish a mayor's commission on the crisis in welfare, which had at Case Western Reserve, Herman Stein as the chair, Ralto Bottermole as the staff member, if you can imagine that today, and folks from here at Cleveland State. So sort of the first engagement of what's the data, what's the facts, collecting information. It also is a reminder, then, if I'm going to jump ahead and jump back a little bit, that this college and the Institute and the Bureau of Urban Research were very much engaged in the community and partnered with the community's institutions, including particularly the major foundations and city and county government. And as a reminder of that, on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Urban College, David Sweet as dean, a number of persons were honored for their work, and I was absolutely fascinated. When I went back, I frankly had forgotten, but Jim Lipscomb, the executive director of the George Gunn Foundation, and Homer Wadsworth, the executive director of the Cleveland Foundation, were recognized as founders, along with other persons whose names you would recognize, like Sweet, Mrs. Levin, Pat Sweeney, Roberta Steinbacher, Tom Campbell. Okay, so the two foundations heads were recognized as being founders on the 10th anniversary. And that really does play a significant part, I think, in terms of this community's history in working on these sets of issues, as well as the foundation's history. Roberta mentioned the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation ought to be somewhere sculptured up there because it also played a very significant role in this community in the 60s and in what I call the restart of the Cleveland Foundation, which, as many of you know, was established in 1914, but abbreviating, big funder, kind of went to sleep as it related to the issues of urban cities, and certainly of Cleveland. And so in 1961, the Ford Foundation agreed to and helped establish a 5-year, $5 million challenge grant at the request of local philanthropies to create the Greater Cleveland Associated Foundation, which would work on the important urban issues of housing, education, race, etc. The leaders at that time wisely decided to have on the board of the Greater Cleveland Associated Foundation the 5-member distribution committee of the Cleveland Foundation. And for its director selected a name familiar to many of us in this room, Dolph Norton, to be the director. Dolph was recommended by Paul Yuvasaker of the Ford Foundation, and obviously the Ford Foundation was putting money into it. Make a long story short, in 1967, when the director of the Cleveland Foundation retired, the combined board said, why don't we have one director for the Cleveland Foundation and the Greater Cleveland Associated Foundation? And so this is a story of how the activist foundation that took a lot of risk captured the giant and returned it to its roots. So Ford, Cleveland, Gunn, lots of others after that were very engaged. The grant that you referred to was $3,039 for the man, okay, to do the conference. And I could go down, and I won't do, but I could go down and cite all of the grants that have been made from 1967 on by the Cleveland and Gunn Foundations, often and most often in partnership, that led to what we know of being a lot of what this college has been engaged in, and I'm not going to do that. And I'll let Norm Krumholtz tell the story of how the Cleveland Foundation and the Gunn Foundations really played a role in the establishment of the Center for Neighborhood Development and insisting that if we were going to put it here as a permanent place, it needed to be in a university setting. And what better place than to negotiate with David Sweet, who could work all kinds of miracles. Two other things, and I'll stop. The building. There came a day when David Sweet called me and said, I want you to come to breakfast, if you will, at the Cleveland Athletic Club. And Henry Goodman, a member, the vice chair of the Cleveland Foundation Board, was chair of the Cleveland State University Board. And Dick Pogue was chair of the Cleveland Foundation Board. And we went to breakfast. And David said, we've got to get out of the Corlett building. I've been doing some research. No, actually he said, Tom Byer has been doing some research on land and land use and what was available. And we have determined and found out that the former Builders Exchange building was in bankruptcy and about to be put out of business. And why not have friends arrange to buy the Builders Exchange building, and we'd like to buy it, but we don't have any money, and we'd have to go to the legislature and see what could be worked out. But guess what? The building is actually owned, okay, by, the building is going to be foreclosed on, and we'd like you, the Cleveland Foundation, to arrange to buy the building. And so that was step one. Step two, he said, our additional research suggests that all this property here, other than the Builders Exchange building, is in your hands because Society National Bank is the trustee for this land on most of the property on 17th and 18th Street. So that led to the foundation getting Society National Bank to acquire the Builders Exchange building and do a lease back, while appropriations could be gotten from the legislature. That's how you got in the Builders Exchange building. And shouldn't we have a master plan for what should happen on the 17th, 18th Street block? And so those grants came from Cleveland and Gunn to do that. And once the master plan got put together, we then the foundation agreed to sell the property, the land, and the buildings to the university at appraised value once it could get its money through the capital project, the capital budget. So thus, this is actually the last building to be built in the complex. And even there, it is the philanthropic community which recognized the importance of this college that stepped up when the appropriations were changed so that it only came in over a 4-year period. We already had all the estimates, so forth, for what it would cost. So it's the foundation community, more than just a couple, who stepped up and said, go ahead, build the building, get it done now, we'll cover that cost of the 4 years. So this is why I think the community feels very much that it is part of all of this. And I will leave some of the other things for others to talk about.
Well, Steve, you've made it clear that you not only walked through the front door, you helped put it there, which is pretty fundamental. We'll go right to Norm, because it looks like there's a great continuity in the stories here.
I'm sure we all learned that it's very, very good to have money. My story in Cleveland goes back to 1969 when I came to Cleveland to work for Carl Stokes. I worked for Mayor Stokes, and then when he left to take a job in New York City, I continued on for 6 more years with Ralph Perk, and then for about a year and a half with Dennis Kucinich. And about that time, 1979, I decided that there were other things that I might do more profitably and more interestingly than being director of city planning. And one of those things was that attracted my attention was the emerging neighborhood movement in Cleveland. The neighborhood movement in Cleveland had gotten underway in the early 70s, largely led by a kind of a leftish segment of the Catholic diocese here, the Commission on Catholic Community Action, and the director of which at that time was a man named Harry Fagan. And Harry and I got along quite well, and we would drink a lot of beer together and talk about similar kinds of issues. And we both decided that what we were trying to do at the City Planning Commission, which was really an innovation in terms of normal, ordinary kinds of city planning, which was trying to plan from the bottom up. Typically what city planners do, and what most politicians and government bureaucrats do, is plan from the top down. The guys with the money and the influence and so on pretty well call the shots, and the politicians and the planners and other public administrators react to those initiatives. That is not unusual. What we were trying to do was work the other side of the coin. And we developed for our general plan, which we published in 1975, the overriding goal of more choices for those who have few. And when you think about that as an overriding goal, more choices for those who have few, it was not more choices. It was very, very specifically aimed at helping the people in the community who had the most difficulties. And strangely enough, the neighborhood organizations, sponsored and assisted by the Commission on Catholic Community Action, were trying to do exactly the same thing. And so we began working together in a kind of professional way. Actually, it wasn't all that professional because 2 of my women planners were dating a couple of the organizers in Harry's groups. I knew nothing about that, of course, but anyway, it was part of the synergistic activities that were going around. And so we prepared, as I was beginning to leave City Hall, a proposal for something called a Center for Neighborhood Development. And the idea would be to be able to give another tool to the neighborhood organizations who were doing a pretty good job organizing the neighborhoods in 8 or 9 neighborhoods around Cleveland, and could use, we thought, some more technical assistance and help in terms of actually developing their physical infrastructure. And so we shopped around the proposal, and sure enough, the Cleveland Foundation and the George Gunn Foundation seemed to be interested. A question arose as to where it would be located. My feeling originally was that it would be a 501c3 freestanding nonprofit organization. The 2 program officers that I spoke with, Steve Minter from the Cleveland Foundation and Hank Dahl from the George Gunn Foundation, had differing kinds of views. Hank, if I recall properly, thought that since I got along so well with Harry Fagan, that maybe I ought to go over to the Catholic Commission and locate the Center for Neighborhood Development there. Steve, I think to his eternal credit, because the other 2 options I spoke would never have worked over the long pole, Steve insisted that had come to the College of Urban Affairs. And I think that was because, if I recall, Steve, the foundation already had substantial investments in the College of Urban Affairs, and the Center for Neighborhood Development would strengthen those investments. And so here we came to the College of Urban Affairs, where we were set up in 1979 and continued for many years into the 90s. I have a short list, a very short list of activities that we were involved in over that period of time, and some of which I regard as our contributions to the community. First of all, maybe most importantly, we established or helped establish the foundation for the city's community development corporations, which now are a national model for neighborhood development and interrelationships with the foundation, the philanthropic community, city government, and the corporate community. And I'm proud to say that our staff had a great deal to do with the establishment of the network of community development corporations. Second, we staffed the emergence of the Cleveland Housing Network. Cleveland Housing Network essentially is the City of Cleveland's housing program. It now has an enviable record of activities and accomplishments, and we're pleased to say that we helped staff the Cleveland Housing Network. We transformed a hotbed motor lodge over on West 26th Street, south of the Detroit Bridge, into the transitional housing developed with the Sisters of St. Joseph. And we also saved, or helped save, the Gordon Square building, which is the linchpin for the Detroit Shoreway Community Organization. In both those cases, my staff worked on preparing the financial documents, and at that time I was sitting on the CMHA board, and I made sure that they got Section 8 project-based subsidies to handle the transition. Both of which, the transitional housing and Detroit Shoreway, are up in good shape at the present moment. We also helped develop a sense of accomplishment on the part of any number of student interns that we processed through the years. And finally, I take more credit than I deserve, I think, for developing a cadre of really outstanding community leaders here in our own community and nationally. And I'll just mention a few. Bill Whitney, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Cuyahoga County Land Bank, Mark McDermott, who's a Regional Director for Enterprise Community Foundation, Pat Costigan, who was with Community Housing in Washington, D.C., and last year served as a special consultant for the Secretary of HUD, and John Lemire, who was a Regional Director for the National Development Council. In addition, any number of staff members, student interns, and so on were processed through the years and have made their own special contribution to the city and the region. And I'll ask Dennis Keating to pick it up from there.
So I arrived on the scene in 1983 from Berkeley, California, and as Bob said, my experience in Cleveland was one day, although my wife had relatives in Cleveland Heights, so there was some connection there. My first introduction to Cleveland was on the third floor of the Corlett building, which was mentioned, which is now the empty space opposite Music and Communications, when the building started to shake. And I was amazed to learn that we were having an earthquake in Cleveland, Ohio, having come from the Bay Area. Right, I was not expecting this, but everybody survived. The Corlett building later did not. Also, when, as Steve mentioned, the acquisition of the building that got torn down to make way for this building, turned out it was the original site of the Baptist Church of John D. Rockefeller, so I had the bright idea of collecting some of the rubble and persuading the Rockefellers to invest in the future of the college based on the historic site. Alas, they never did, but at least I tried. So 1987, Norm left us to go off to the American Academy in Rome, and never having administered anything in my life, I volunteered to take over temporarily until he returned from Rome, the Center for Neighborhood Development and his great staff, and I did, and then made way for Phil Starr, who succeeded Norm as director. The Center for Neighborhood Development and Norm's reputation, as well as Tom Byer and his housing program, were two of the things that attracted me to the college, knowing not much else about the university or Cleveland. And the other possibility that was given me by David Sweet was to create a graduate program in urban planning. And that introduced me to the politics of Ohio universities, in which, in order to get this through the Board of Regents, we had to agree to pair up with Kent State University. And then, to my amazement, Akron University said, we would like to be part of this degree program too, which did not happily turn out to be the case. So only about 1990, that program actually was approved, started, and we now have hundreds of graduates of the program. And I directed it for a few years, and then came back more recently to direct it again. That led to my 25 years of being an interim director and director of many programs. I guess that's what I'm best known for around here, as a department chair, an associate dean, an interim dean, and director or interim director of many programs, including our urban center. So for better or worse, I managed to do what others did not seem to be terribly interested in volunteering to do, at least on many occasions. Happily, no longer. My impressions of the college, I think there are a few things that stand out. One, that we are extremely small, even smaller when I arrived in terms of people. So the advantage was this place was very flexible and innovative, and with David Sweet at the helm, for whom I worked for many years, very creative, shall we say. Not necessarily appreciated by others in the university. Flip side was we were the smallest college in the university, which meant that we had to overcome a lot of obstacles in terms of, I think at some points, virtual survival, at least financially speaking, in terms of enrollment and all that sort of thing. We had an endowed chair, which is pretty amazing for a small college. I guess Roberta could talk more about that, how that came to be. We also are a one-department college, which we had to explain on numerous occasions as to why we had one department and a proliferating number of academic programs, but I think that stood us in good stead, unless, as opposed to having a multiple number of departments and the complications that that brings. As a commuter school and college, and basically focused on Cleveland and to some extent Ohio, I think it's also pretty impressive. We gained a national reputation, national rankings. Norm became, or was president of two of the national planning organizations. Cy Murray, when he was here, was also extremely prominent in public administration nationally. So you had a very small college and a public commuter university with a national, or to some extent an international reputation, which I think stood us in good stead as well. So I think I will stop at that point, and back to you, Bob.
Yeah, sure. First, a little footnote to your brick story about the Rockefeller bricks. There is still a brick. Now I've learned the origin of the brick that still sits in the dean's office here, and it is the one surviving brick from that building when it came down. And
if you know a good Rockefeller who might be interested in that.
Perhaps we'll find a way to sell it back to them one day. You said you had something you want to say?
Where'd the rocks go, Dennis? We had all those rocks. We were
Right
gonna
there,
build a
in
beautiful
some university warehouse somewhere.
Well, what strikes me listening to these stories is people who came with an idea of what they wanted to do, and the institution got built around it. And this leads to the first question that's come up, and I urge people to write questions down and put them on the cards. Molly will circulate around. What are you most proud of in regard to your relationship and the accomplishments you've been part of that have associated you with this college over the years? So what is it you're most proud of?
Our alumni alumni, the positions they hold in this city, this state, the United States. I mean, we've had 2 mayors of Cleveland, many suburbs. We've had the head of the Job Corps. We've had the Workforce Development Office of Department of Labor. We've got two other people very high up in NIH, I think it is, or the other one, National Science Foundation. That's what I'm proud of.
I'm really very proud of an awful lot of the major kinds of things that have occurred in Cleveland, in housing, in neighborhoods, in economic development, in data building and research. And this college is often at the core and center of providing the resourceful, intellectual, academic talent that's helped it. I mean, I think my years at the Cleveland Foundation, and I think I could speak certainly for my predecessors, Dolph Norton, Homer Wadsworth, I think they would have said basically the same thing. We'd have had to invent it or constantly go out of town to try and find that, and you can't do that. So that's what I think this college means, and I think I would be candid about it. There are an awful lot of persons in this community for a long period of time who thought the president of Cleveland State University was David Sweet.
I think I'm most proud of the programs and the projects that my staff developed through the years. And I'm also very, very proud of the associations and friendships that I've made with the people who are my staff at City Hall and the people I worked with at the Center for Neighborhood Development. Many of these people are friends for 20 and 30 years now, and they continue to be close personal friends. And I think that's a substantial achievement, and I'm very proud of that.
Well, I would say Cleveland State University calls itself an engaged university, and it seems to me this college epitomizes community engagement. So in terms of all of our classes and the faculty who've done field projects, work for community organizations, and city and county government over the time I've been here, I think is probably the most impressive achievement. In the case of my urban planning program, at one point a few years ago, I tallied over 50 people who were graduated from that program, some of whom are here who were at that time working in the field of neighborhood and community development. So I think engagement certainly describes the accomplishments of a lot of the people at this college.
Norm, did you have something to add? When I first came here, what I had heard of this place was related to a lot of the personal goals that I just heard people say here. Norm, you slip in very quietly, oh, we just decided to think of planning as what was going to, how are we going to help the neighborhoods and have them become involved. That was a fundamental shift that this place not only practiced, but you also wrote about. I'm curious, how is it in this type of setting where you are and have been engaged not only in the classroom, but also out on the street and out in communities. How does that create a mixture that gives you a stronger voice in what you write and what you publish and what goes out for other colleagues in other universities to read and to reflect on? Norma, I'd like to ask you that first, and then Dennis, you.
Well, I'll take the first crack. I think virtually everything I've published, and that includes some 5 books and a lot of chapters and professional articles, have been shaped by the concept of equity planning, which is the planning for those who have few choices. And I think intellectually that makes a great deal of sense. It makes a great deal of sense, particularly for a city like Cleveland. And it makes a great deal of sense for fellow practitioners, planning practitioners, not only in disinvested parts of our United States, but also in parts of the world that are struggling. And I was absolutely amazed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s how many invitations I would get from all over the world to come and talk about equity planning. And the concept, I think, has a great deal of merit, and Cleveland State University and the College of Urban Affairs has been tremendously supportive on something that might not have been all that popular in many quarters, and as a matter of fact might have been contentious. But CSU has been great.
Dennis?
Well, we have a course called Contemporary Urban Problems that I've taught in one form or another for a long time, and one of the great things about Cleveland is there's no shortage of urban problems to write and teach and talk about. So a little facetious, but yeah, I think other thing is that we have in the university a lot of first-time college students and graduates. So you've got a lot of people who come here with tremendous life experience about the city and the region that contribute, I think, to a lot of the research that's been done here, a lot of the writing that's been done. And this forum, I think, is one of the important aspects of the college, that a lot of these problems and issues get talked about right here where we are in the Steinbacher atrium of the Levin College.
Well, that's a pass to you, Roberta, for your comments on that. How has this environment here, how did it help you as a scholar, as someone thoughtful about the urban problems that exist?
Oh, Bob, you're not going to like this answer. Yeah, and I'll make this quick, but when I came first, we had no personnel action, we had no college, no nothing that the university rules said you had to have, because we weren't legit yet. So I had to, when it came, my tenure clock was ticking, so all I knew was psychology. I never had a course in urban anything. I was working out in the community and reading, but I hadn't published yet. So I started publishing like crazy in psychology to save my job. And this college since then has allowed me to go around the country doing my psychological research. So that's what I mean. Can't contribute to, I wrote one article for PAR, and that was on management, which I did a lot of. But urban issues, I tried to address them, and I was on a lot of boards, but I didn't publish much at all.
Yeah, but no, the truth's always been out. That's part of the mixture we have here. I'm wondering if maybe Steve, from the outside, looking in, this was a place, Dennis alluded to it, we were one department. The college has always been one department with all these different programs, and you could see, well, you've got this urban planning program, and you've got public administration. What do they have to do with each other? And why shouldn't there be maybe another department of nonprofit or why or environmental studies? Well, these are all different things, and yet this place has always organized itself as one unified department with lots and lots of talent there. And Steve, I'm just wondering, that's always an issue since I've been here, internally discussed. I was wondering from the outside, was that anything that anyone on the outside even noticed? And from the others, from the inside, what's the strength of that lack of division, if you will?
Well, I'll try and answer it the best in terms of the way we think. I mean, I think we were well aware of, and now I'll put my Cleveland Foundation hat on, we were well aware of the fact that this was an academic institution. And I think that we appreciated that what it meant to have an urban university and what it meant to have an urban college. But we didn't spend a lot of our time at the Cleveland Foundation worrying about what was going on in the academic class, in the classrooms. We were looking at it as being, here is a resource in the community where there's some talented, very smart people, and the possibility of turning to these persons for technical assistance, for brain power, for helping think things through. And we recognized periodically that there was some tension about it. And, you know, I will say, frankly, we didn't happen to mention here, but getting the state appropriation for the UUP program meant then that I think Dean Sweet was in a position of saying, you know, I have my own little foundation too, right? So then now the foundations could negotiate together around, if we're going to support the Center for Neighborhood Development, and we're going to put in $120,000, and Gunn's going to put in $120,000. Mr. Dean, how much are you putting up? Okay, and if we're going to talk about regional economic issues, we went through a lot of those kinds of things of sort of the negotiation, because we were more on the practitioner side. But at the same time, it was immensely helpful to have this resource here, and nationally recognized persons. Okay. And I can recall, and I know Norm does, you know, the negotiation that went on. If Norm was going to come here and be the director of the Center for Neighborhood Development, then the foundations were interested in, and is he going to be given an opportunity to be in a tenure track position? And those are the things that go on back and forth, and I think it's, you know, very pleasing kind of what happens.
But Norm, I wonder if you don't mind, it may be uncomfortable, but you've had the kind of career that a lot of people around here have had, where I learned long ago, when you have a career where you're on both sides of a fence and you're sitting on the fence, sometimes it gets a little uncomfortable sitting on that fence. What was your experience coming in here, and how did you make yourself at home?
I never thought about it very much, because I thought that what I was doing as a director in the Center for Neighborhood Development was pretty much what I was doing as director of city planning for the city of Cleveland. There were other things that I was involved in as planning director. There are responsibilities that transcend what goes on in a small center. When I was in City Hall, I had 40 or 50 people working for me. When I was in the Center for Development, I had 6 or 7. That was all. So the range of activities was different, but our focus on the neighborhoods and on street level activities and trying to provide a better life for people in the city who needed help never changed at all. Mm-hmm. And Dave Sweet, a tremendously creative guy, converted me into a professor without that much help. Actually, I got a lot of help from past Levin chairs, because one of our early Levin chairs was a guy named Marty Rhine from MIT. And Marty and I got to be good friends, and I would sit in his classes and audit his classes. because I wondered how you maintained the attention of the students over a long period of time. And I watched him teach, and I learned, I guess, how to teach. So it was a series of very supportive activities all the way.
Right. Which is the hallmark of this place. It's I can talk as an outsider, how unusual that is in other graduate schools around the country and other, especially in public universities.
You know, I didn't think so at the time, but I think so now. I think so because increasingly, in my impression, universities are hiring PhDs. Nothing but PhDs. No credit for experience at all, particularly in my field. And I don't have a PhD. Oh, I guess I do have a PhD now. I got an honorary PhD at the last convocation. But I didn't have a PhD, and I was a strange hybrid in that sense. But it was never a liability at all.
Right. Well, let's see, one question here gives us a chance to perhaps put to rest a story that goes around. The question is, was the college once part of the business college before becoming our own entity? Someone once said that there was. I don't think that's true.
Not on your life. Or mine. No, we were never part of a college. Like I said, when we were writing the first proposal, we had other people in with us. MPA and continuing ed was kind of in and out, never serious about it. Nobody wanted to do this thing, see. So, no, we had a business school fellow on that. We were all half-time, like I said, back in his college of business. And but no, we were not ever a college. I want to say one thing about why we are a college outside of the students hitting the streets when we were about to be absorbed into arts and sciences as a department. My thought was, and I spread it everywhere I could, we can't have a college. We've got this research unit. I mean, we can't be a department in A&S. We need a college because we have two things besides the academic part, which I think we could have pulled off and become a department. We had the Levin chair, which was the only one in the university, and by some great miracle, we had Maxine Levin give that chair just when we needed it because it gave us standing, and we had a huge argument of whether it was going to be in political science or us, but the first president says, put it in the Institute of Urban Studies. We had that, and then we had the students taking to the streets when we were about to be, and they pushed, the president said right away, I'll make this interim business, and people kind of laughed at it, but it worked. So for a year, we were interim, and then we got the vote in '77 because our students, two of them ran for faculty council. We had no business, we couldn't even run for council, the Senate these days it's called. So two students got on there, and that gave us enough votes to win in 1977. So that was the beginning of the college. And don't forget, the Institute was founded in '67, the college in '77, and next year will be the 50th anniversary of one and the 40th of the other.
Well, we've heard some really, I think, very powerful discussion of how the college has evolved in partnership with the philanthropic community, and especially the two leading philanthropies in the area. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about other institutions within the region that the college has had successful relationships with, and are there any principles there in regard to identifying institutions that we need to have stronger relationships with in our future? Yeah, other institutions in the region. Oh, here, Norm has one. There you go.
Well, I guess my first immediate reaction is city and county government and the county mayors and city managers association. I mean, the mayors and managers association was really the first one out the door in terms of being funded to work with the institute or the bureau, where Pete Halbin was the person they worked with, and it seems to me one of the things that has happened in this community is that the kind of partnerships between philanthropy, higher education, and government have been very significant, and I think we could point to just lots and lots of associations, and I think that would be true of other governmental bodies like NOACA, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
I think they see themselves as being major partners and engaged here.
Mm-hmm.
Not just so happens I'm talking about the foundations, but if you go through and you look at the programs that have been carried out over a long period of time, the one thing about Cleveland is there are probably multiple institutions, and there are many, many persons who have been associated with many different things.
Norm, Dennis, any?
Well, Norm mentioned Cleveland Housing Network. Kathy Hexter is on the board. We've had past people on the board. I think the network of community development organizations, in my experiences, both our graduates who direct and work at them, and then those who've gotten degrees here, and then classes that have worked with them, is a pretty strong continuing tie.
Norm, anything to add?
I'm surprised nobody mentions state government.
Right. I was going to prompt you.
Pat Sweeney, when he was in state government, made a big difference to the formation of this college and to strengthen it in a number of ways. And it would be wonderful if we had a decent administration and, if we had a good relationship. I was going to criticize the state government, but I don't think it's appropriate. If we had a decent relationship with the state government, that would be extremely helpful.
Well, since Steve mentioned the Urban University Program, for those who were not here in the golden era of relations with the state government, we did have a statewide consortium of urban university or programs in urban universities that funded a lot of the research and supported this college. And alas, several years ago that went away. So not too surprising in terms of the relationship of the state government to cities in general, but that was fairly unique, I think, in the country while it lasted.
Yeah, I was going to say, because one of the unique components of the college has been it's always had the research agenda of its regular tenure track faculty, but it's also had the centers. I was wondering if Roberta, perhaps you were here. You came in the door when the whole place was an institute, before it was a college. What role have the centers played in keeping this college such an unusual mixture?
Well, not to mention all the good things they've done in the community and trained our students to know. The political part is, as I mentioned back in '76 and '7, if we hadn't had that kind of separate center institute, we changed the name to center back then, I think, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today because we would have just been an academic department. There's the political reason, and then there's all the good they've done out in the community, and I'm grateful for both parts of that.
It's hard to say I'm an outsider anymore. I've been around 13 years, but I will say that something that I really came to appreciate and understand this past year was I had the opportunity to serve on the search committee for our new dean. And I will tell you, I learned more in that I regretted that I didn't appreciate, but appreciated how much I learned of the extraordinary things the members of this faculty were doing. And I commented that being here for 13 years, most of the time I was here between the hours of 8 in the morning and 5. I did co-teach a class with Stuart, which I got a great deal out of, and I did have a chance to interact with students. But I wasn't really interacting with other faculty members. And it was only through, being on the search committee that I began to understand all of the incredible kinds of things that were being done and the real scholars that we have. And I was quick to say to the dean candidates and certainly Dean Anglian, wow, we need to find a way that we bring the practitioner people who are and academic researchers in the urban institutes with the faculty members in a stronger way so that there's interaction. I mean, I feel regretful of all of the persons and some things I probably could have learned a great deal from that I never had any interaction with because everything was happening after 6 o'clock and people were busy going. So I hope that over time we can do something about that.
Let's see, I want to keep us on time. Let me go back to the first big question that I laid out in the context here. And that's, what's the role of an urban university? And particularly, what's the role of an urban college in an urban university? Roberta, when you were talking about the earliest times here at the Institute, you've made a couple of different references to the notion that this idea of engagement was not firmly rooted in the rest of the university. That's not true today. Our colleagues in the business school, our colleagues in the law school, our colleagues in the engineering program, our colleagues, all the different pieces of the university, you see lots of people, look at the education school, that are enormously involved in a way that was quite controversial when we got started, right? So we're in an era where we do have to think through, first of all, we are part of a much broader institution that indeed is really engaged in lots of ways, and so are we. So we claim victory, yes. Our model has actually paid off, and part of our spoils is we have this really great national reputation for it, right? But spoil quickly. One has to figure out what comes next, and that's where we are with our strategic refresh. Given what you understand of the history of the university as a whole and our college in particular, what are the lessons for us to reconceptualize and to dig even further and deeper into our tradition and help establish yet another wave of innovation for how an urban college in an urban university can be part of the 21st century experience of urban life in this region? It's a big question to ask. I'll give you a moment to think about it. But where do we go from here based on our laurels?
Oh my, it's a big one. You're right. It's a really big one. I think that two things. We've got to solicit all the help we can get from other colleges, and one way to do that is, when we first made the PhD, it happened between us and Akron. We started that in 1981. That was truly two interdisciplinary programs going on, and by the way, the provost at that time said, "Urban, you're going to have the first social science PhD in the university," and indeed we did, and there hasn't been any since. We're the only social science, sort of. I mean, but we would call it a broader area than that, but that's what they were talking about. And then Dolph Norton became the chancellor. I mean, Dolph Norton became the chancellor before that of the Ohio's state universities. And he said, he urged us to have it by a proclamation or memorandum or whatever. And that must have been about 79 or 80 because we started, maybe 80, we started at 81. That PhD began with, we had people from all over, researchers from the university in the group. We only now have our own. So that might be a way to get more research carried on with us and, let's say, other departments that we really need more. And they could be on dissertation committees, which some are now, but I mean, they could run them for us. So that might expand that. And the other thing is, that's the one. The other area is, in my personal opinion, we have to be talking about what's going to happen to cities, and as we just gradually, in fact, it's speeding up a bit, becoming, these blue islands in the Red Sea. And what that has to do with funding, we already know the funding has gone from, when I came, it was like 70-some% or 80 of state funding. We're now down to what, 23 or 4? Somebody that's up on this, of state funding.
No, thank you. Dennis?
Well, my understanding from the history and the origins, the purpose of the college was to focus on urban problems, as in the city of Cleveland. If you look at the enrollment in this university, I think the majority of the students live in the suburbs, as does the majority of the population in the region. So really, while the focus should be on cities like East Cleveland and Cleveland, cities that have lots of problems, in reality, I think we had to also address regional problems, and to address regional problems, and you got to deal with the state government as well as the federal government. So it seems to me the focus should still be on the primary issues that affect cities like Cleveland with lots of problems, but not totally, and also introduce a lot of the students who come through here to the city of Cleveland and its neighborhoods, which they may not be familiar with. Perhaps their parents or grandparents were, but they don't actually live here.
Right. Right. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, Margaret. But before we finish, Norm, you were going to say something.
I was just going to second the comments that Dennis made. If you look closely at the kinds of problems that we have in our urban areas, they are increasingly regional and metropolitan problems. And so, in my judgment, the metropolitan area should be the focus of our research and our attention, but at the same time maintaining the kind of attention that creates the basis for equity planning.
Right.
That in our interest in solving the problems of the region, we do not neglect the problems of those who have the greatest number of difficulties.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Steve, did you want to say one last comment before?
I'm going to get into trouble, I guess. I mean, I absolutely agree. Where there has to be a sharp focus. But I'd be very quick to say that it's got to be region-wide. And you know, there are as many, or a significant number of disadvantaged minority students in the suburbs of Cleveland, and if you broaden it out. One of the things which I think I would give this college a lot of credit for being help push the momentum, and I see Pat Sweeney sitting back there who pounded on the table time after time to try and bring folks in the region together to address the sort of 8 counties, 17 counties thing. And I'll say, I think out of that kind of leadership of Pat and his colleagues, that's what influenced the foundations.
Mm-hmm.
That's what influenced John Ong and Dick Pogue, and I could go on and start down and name a whole lot of persons to begin to push out and to say we've got to begin to address things regionally, even when it's difficult. That's what led to philanthropy stepping up and establishing the fund for the economic future of the region, although there are lots of bumps and bruises about how the region should be defined. So I hope we keep an emphasis on the region, not to take anything away from what's happening in the municipalities, but I remember years ago sitting in the foundation in a committee meeting where we had some folks from Cleveland State University, the College of Education, coming in, bringing us some data. And the thing that suddenly hit all of us is, here we're talking about struggling in Cleveland as the foundation needed to really be involved. But by the way, how many minority students, high school students, are there in Warrensville, East Cleveland, Garfield, Garfield Heights, Euclid, South Euclid? And guess what? The numbers added up to the equivalent of those graduating out of the Cleveland Public Schools. Okay? So, and I think today we know that the suburbs are as challenged right now as the city.
Right, right. Well, this has been an extraordinary opportunity to share some stories, to share some wisdom, and to share some deep thought about what the past of this college, how it relates to our present, and how we stitch it together into the future. I'm proud to say that everybody on the stage is engaged in our process of thinking about the future, because you're all still here. We have lots of people here in the audience who have had an important part of your past relate to this institution. And we want to make certain that we benefit from that as we reflect on our present and try to piece together our future. So one of the things that we've done, and Molly and Kathy have set this up, is if you go in the gallery over here off the side, the Campbell Gallery, we have an opportunity for people to share your own personal experiences and reflections on the college on tape. And we'll be capturing all of that. And we are indeed going to be spending some time targeting a bunch of people with some additional interviews, just to make certain that part of this refresh process gives us the full leverage of the wisdom of what we have been, and all the stories of people's passion, people's interests, all those bumps, ups and downs, and difficulties of actually building a real living human, living and breathing institution called the Levin College. That hopefully will give us enough background to wisely steer our next steps. And I thank all of you for coming this evening. I thank you for the contributions you're going to leave us on the videotapes. I thank our panel. And we have recorded this. It'll be available on our website. So if anyone wasn't able to come, or if you know people who weren't able to come, tell them to please take advantage of that opportunity to read through it. I think this has been a very important part of our own strategic refresh process. And the challenge for those of us who are in the building every day, we walk through those doors every single day, is to make certain that what we build next stands up to what has already been in place. So thank you again very much for your time and your wisdom.